Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, the sounds of the world surround you. The crunch of rocks beneath your boots, the whisper of wind in the pine needles, the call of a distant hawk. Approaching the doors of the Anselm Society Digital Pub, you are soon greeted by a cacophonous symphony of sound, raucous conversations on the arts, faith, and whether 50s sci-fi was the golden age of radio theater. In a corner, by the fire, are three people. One of them is doing a bad impression of the opening of The Shadow. In case you're wondering, that person's me, Matt Mellema. And in case you're wondering, that impression is, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. So like I said, I'm Matt Mellema, and this is Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to one very simple goal: a renaissance of the Christian imagination. To further this goal, we do all sorts of things, of course, COVID permitting. You all know this by now. Each spring, we have our big Imagination Redeemed conference, which attracts folks from all across the country. We have a regular slate of concerts, lectures, and other events designed to foster love and understanding of arts and faith. And we have our very own Guild of Artists right here in Colorado Springs. And when we aren't creating art, some of us like to podcast. Therefore, Believe to See. To find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us over at anselmsociety.org. And while you're there, why don't you rate and review the show, or, hop on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us out a ton. We really appreciate the help. And Mandy, I want your straight opinion. What did you think of my Shadow impression?
I thought that was fantastic. I have to admit, I don't think I've heard the original. So maybe that colors my impressed stance on the matter. I'll have to go look and see which I prefer. I can get back to you on that.
Well, you just keep the opinion. You don't need that. But I will say the Shadow is very near and dear to my heart. My grandpa Bob was a big buff of old time radio programs, so I was all about the Shadow back in the day. And I will probably be doing the voice all through the evening now, so I would like to apologize to my wife in advance. But Mandy, I would like to take you back in time to sort of set the stage for today's episode.
Okay.
So I want to take you back several months. Think about the very early days of the quarantine, when all of us are naive and thinking, oh, we'll just stay in our homes for a couple weeks and everything will be better.
Are you sure that was just a few months? I don't know. I think
it was either a few months or maybe last century. I don't know. These could be memories of a different life. So yeah, I'm doing that. And as you know, Mandy, I'm also trying to cobble together my query letters for my book, which is no picnic. So I was doing that. And then I get this email from Brian Brown, El Capitan, our fearless leader over at Anselm. And he's like, hey, here's something you should look into. So I see what he says. And it's from this group called the Merry Beggars, who are a radio theater group, and they're doing something called the Quarantine Plays, where they're asking for scripts about 10 to 15 minutes long about something related to quarantine. So I was like, hey, that sounds like it's actually fun. So I write my script, do all that. Mm-hmm. Fast forward several months.
Okay.
I have been rejected over and over by publishers. As you know, always happens, and you always brace yourself for it, but then you're like, oh no, I'm the worst writer, all that. So I'm doing that. But then in the midst of that, I get a note from the Merry Beggars saying, hey, we'll produce your script. So it's one of about a dozen scripts they're producing. I was super excited.
What
and
joy.
I have been listening to, I know, it was just what a very depressed, neurotic writer needed to hear. And
excellent.
So fast forward to now, they're going through their quarantine plays. I've been listening to them, and the leader of the Merry Beggars agreed to join us on the show today. So Peter Atkinson, welcome to the Anselm Society Digital Pub Table.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew and Mandy. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so as you were explaining, you explained to me over email that you actually have some prior connections with Brian Brown. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that is right. He was running an online magazine, online journal, I guess is a better term for it, called Humane Pursuits. And some of my friends who are connected with the Intercollegiate Studies Institute pointed me in that direction, ended up writing a piece. And so I knew this mythical figure of Brian Brown who was doing good cultural work, and I've admired the Anselm Society from afar. But this is the first time I've had direct connection with you guys, and I'm excited and grateful.
All right, awesome. So as I've already said, I go back quite a ways with radio theater. I love it to pieces. Mandy, you have some experience with radio theater as well. Why don't you tell us all about that?
I have a brush with radio theater. I think it's your fault, actually. I was asked.
It kind of is.
It is, yeah. I was asked to audition for an upcoming potential project. And so I went and auditioned for that. The interesting thing for me, I am an amateur, but a stage actress. And I don't think I realized how much I use my face, because they kept having to encourage me to put more into my voice. And I didn't realize that I was not as expressive with my voice as I thought. So that was an interesting thing I hadn't necessarily given much thought to, but I'm eager to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I've already mentioned, big fan of like the golden age radio dramas, but also there's a lot of new stuff in the podcast realm that I think is really exciting too. And I get the feeling Peter's going to be the guy with the answers on this. But first, Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, how you got into this line of art.
How far back do you want me to go? Because I was born in Canada. I won't give you a year by year, blow by blow. But I was born in Canada, and my dad ended up moving to the United States. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I was growing up, I was homeschooled, and there was a great theater troupe that I kept on going to. They had rehearsals every Friday. It was one of those things where you don't realize that it's really an excuse for your parents to sort of get you into an educational realm. So we would rehearse for a year to put on a play without realizing that that's usually longer than most rehearsal periods are for plays. So, but it was an invaluable experience. And I did that for 11 years growing up. And so to me, performing and theater was always just part of the fabric of life. So then I went to undergrad. I studied classics, learned Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, did the whole academic thing. But there was always this bug of performing that I could never quite get vaccinated against. And so, I kept on going back to performance. And I had a job lined up after I graduated. I had accepted a provisional contract. It was a really wonderful job. But this local high school approached me and asked me to teach a sample class just to, see if I liked it. They knew that I was going to fall in love with it. So I did. And I turned down the other job and ended up teaching Shakespeare and forming a theater program at this school right out of college. And then one thing led to another. And I end up applying for and getting into Columbia University's MFA program in acting, back in 2017. Which I just finished this past spring, actually.
Wow, that's
and
cool.
Throughout, thanks. And throughout, it was just like theater, performance, being an actor, that whole gambit. One of the strangest things, you go to an MFA degree, spend 3 years training intensely, every day you're doing vocal movements, acting exercises, scene exercises, you're performing in plays off Broadway, just wonderful experience. And then you graduate, and for the first time in a long time, your entire industry shuts down. Just completely shuts down.
Oh, yes. Perfect timing there.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
But in a strange way, it ended up being sort of providential, because while I was at Columbia, I spent a long while forming the Merry Beggars and starting to build the network around it. And we had a lot of really cool activities planned for 2021, a conference planned in New York City. And then when all of that was made impossible, I was forced to sort of sit down and figure out what we should do instead, what should be our next step. So I call up one of my board members, and we toss ideas back and forth. And then I realized I've loved old radio since I was a kid. And when I was a child, I guess I was in grade school, my brother and I would make parody old radio shows for my family for Christmas. So we made like a Lone Ranger parody, a Superman parody, an Archie parody, things that homeschoolers don't realize other kids aren't spending their time doing. And so I thought, why don't we launch a radio contest? Because I wasn't quite sure how we would do it, but I figured, we can figure out how to produce this remotely. And it's turned out to be the most popular thing the Merry Beggars has done and the most successful. And it's pointed us in a really exciting direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I can confirm because I've been following what you guys have been doing, and I've been really, really excited by it. So the Merry Beggars, because just a quick glance around your website shows you have like the quarantine plays, but you do a lot of other stuff too. So was it originally, in this pre-COVID world that we all have vague memories of, were you planning to do in-person acting as well as radio theater? Was it only in person? How did that grow and evolve over time?
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with radio at the beginning. It had zero to do with radio. I mean, I get frustrated because my dad turns out to be right about a lot more things than I want to admit. And so he would always say, I think your love of radio and your experience with radio, I think that'll be useful in the future. And I was like, all right, great. We're gonna have everyone return to their radio sets. That's gonna happen. And then when this happened, we pivoted to doing radio. But originally our mission it's the same mission, but the way we were gonna accomplish our mission was gonna be through in-person theater. We had a conference planned for high school drama teachers to come into New York City and train with some of the world's best movement teachers and voice teachers and acting teachers, so that all these high school teachers could go back to their high schools and give those tools to their students. So we were trying to figure out ways to have a lasting and a deep impact in the culture, more than just doing this production or that production. Because my experience in theater had really shown me how much work it is to get one theatrical production up. I mean, it takes a significant amount of money to do even a short run of a play, especially in New York. And then on top of that, people are going to the theater for 8 hours a day to rehearse, and you have technicians, production budgets, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you can get enough, butts in seats, as we say, to actually break even with the money, then you all celebrate. You think you've changed everything for humanity, and you wake up the next week and it's it can be a letdown. There's the post-show blues that everyone in acting talks about, because it's so ephemeral. And so we were thinking of programs like the teacher training program and local artist events, which sounds similar to what you guys are doing with the Artist Guild, of really nourishing and giving artists the network and the encouragement that they need to persevere. But one of the things that was really interesting, which I learned over the past few months, was the one thing that artists want more than a network and more than a social hour, as much as I love both those things, is getting their work produced. It's the one thing that's elusive. And so when the opportunity came to actually produce writers' work, it got the most response of anything we've done. We got 120 play submissions from around the world. We for the first 2 radio shows, we got over 1,000 voice actors auditioning. So it opened my eyes to, I was avoiding the production line of work because I knew how much time and resources it took. But this really was, I felt a bit providential in pointing us in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can vouch for you on a whole lot of that stuff. That's definitely resonating. But Mandy, you're the one with acting experience along these lines, so I'm guessing you can speak to a lot of those same things he was talking about, and just the craft of acting and getting a play off the ground.
Right. I mean, I've never done anywhere close to Broadway unless you call Broadway. I mean, it's off Broadway for sure. But yeah, and the post-show blues, oh my goodness, especially the better the show, the worse the blues.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard.
Well, it can be a lot. And I've seen, one of the things too was growing up in DC. DC is the world of politics and nonprofits. And so I grew up seeing a lot of nonprofits. And one of the things that I saw was nonprofits would strategically choose a project which would they weren't aware of how much resources it would take, and so they would burn out. I've known a good number of theater companies who have an amazing mission, just really beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mission, and some of the best people you'll ever meet at the helm, and even talent and on and on and on. But then they, doing theater is so intensive that usually after a few years, they burn out. And so one of the things with the Merry Beggars that I've been intentionally trying to do is, how do we make something where it can be sustainable and beautiful and life-giving to put a show out there? That's the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my very limited experience in this. Is my sister-in-law taught theater for a while in high school, and just observing her do that work of whipping these high schoolers into shape, getting everything together for the show. I will say I would be physically sore going home from watching her perform because I was so tight. Like, it needs to go well. It needs to go well. It has to go well. That was stressful for me. And my role was audience member.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And ironically, too, I mean, so much of graduate school and so much of Broadway and off-Broadway training is learning how to relax.
Yep.
But the thing is like when you're in an environment, when you're in most nonprofit theatrical environments, the constant feeling is sort of like anxiety, and it often doesn't create the theater that really like feeds the depths of our soul.
And the team matters so much. I mean, if you don't, the director, assistant director, each cast member, if you don't enjoy each other, it's a nightmare. And then that I think that shows on the stage if there's not a rapport, don't you?
Absolutely. And one of the best things about graduate school was I got to spend 3 years building an ensemble with 14 other people day in, day out. And it was a really beautiful thing to see. It's funny too, because the tradition in most in most non-Western countries and somewhat in Europe, the tradition is that you form a theater troupe for life. You don't go into a nonprofit and audition, or a theater troupe and audition, and then you leave after the show is done. In Russia, you actually would perform one part for your entire life.
Oh gosh.
That was your trade. And it's just a very different approach to theater. Most European theaters do actually do that model. Mm-hmm. You'll have repertory groups or theater troupes, but it's a different way of doing theater.
I did not know that.
Oh man, just that's sounding very interesting, actually. So one final point on sort of the in-person style before we go to the radio portion. Do you have any plans for what the Merry Beggars can do, assuming we reach this day in the future where we're allowed to get together without COVID? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, no. So right now we're focusing on the radio shows because it seems to be something that's letting us grow at a much faster rate than anything else. Mm-hmm. We're able to reach a national and an international audience with these productions. And our goal is to have those form the foundation for our programming in the future. I don't really see a future in which we don't do radio productions. And I really want to get back to doing in-person theater productions. So one of the ideas actually, which spun out of the radio productions, was people do live podcast recordings. So, if you have your favorite podcast and it's really popular and it has a celebrity, chances are they'll be selling out stadiums or theaters for a live podcast recording. And likewise, I thought, why don't we bring it back where when, COVID permitting, we're able to do in-person events, why not have at a university or a theater a live recording of a script and have it be a live event where you have the sound effects done by a Foleyman on stage.
Wow,
you have your thunder, your footsteps and everything. And you actually have a live interactive experience with it. Crowd noises would be pretty easy, something like that. And that way you can actually make radio theater sort of like a festival event. Down the road, I'm also, one of the projects we're working on, this is, going to be 5 years in the making at least, is a national theater festival. for Christian and Catholic artists. So nothing like that exists right now. And a lot of the reason for that is because it's pretty heavy lifting organizationally. And you need to sort of lay framework and have it be a multi-year effort. So that's one of our dreams. Whether or not we're able to make that happen is another story. But God willing, that would be a dream come true for me.
That is an excellent segue, the way you framed it, where you definitely want to have the in-person stuff, but you see the radio being such a big part of it. And I will add, parenthetically, I have been to one of those events. I was like a kid, and it was an event in town where they did like a radio theater recording live. Super fun. 5 out of 5 would recommend. I think that's a great idea.
I mean, it's so much fun. It would be one of those things which you get to do at your work where you're like, is this really work? Like, I get to have a tongue-in-cheek, like, kid in a candy shop feeling. I mean, that would be amazing. And also it would be such an easy event, relatively speaking, to a theater production, but yet it would provide, so much of the joy and the festivity around something like that. I think it could be a really, really fun event. So I'll send you both invites whenever we're able to do it.
Excellent.
There we go. So now let's go back and look at the time when you're thinking about launching like this radio theater, which you probably thought then was like a radio theater branch of the Merry Beggars. What was your knowledge of like the surrounding like radio drama landscape in terms of like podcasts, other stuff? And what kind of niche or role did you see Merry Beggars being able to fill in that landscape?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Most of my knowledge of radio up to that point, radio theater that is, up to that point, stopped at around 1965, I would say. And so I had to do a little bit of studying, because I would listen to, Johnny Dollar, 5 Minute Mystery, Suspense, The Lone Ranger, X-1, all of those. I would listen to those every single night in college. And so I knew sort of the format and the way you tell stories in an audio format, and this different genres that are possible, what works, what doesn't work. So I had a good working knowledge of the medium, but I didn't really know what had happened since television. And, I was vaguely aware, right? And I listened to podcasts, but I usually listened to, nonfiction podcasts, history, theology, politics, literature, etc. And so I had to do a little bit of digging. I'd listened to one drama podcast, but I didn't really know the landscape. And what I found was that most podcasts, I mean, the number of podcasts that are out there is, ridiculous. It's just mind-boggling and mind-numbing how many podcasts are out there. But there aren't actually that many scripted fictional podcasts. There was a company that made one called Homecoming. I think it was by Gimlet Media. And they poured a lot of money into it. They got A-list celebrity talent. And then it was picked up by, I think, Amazon Prime and turned into a TV series. And then Marvel did an audio series on a Wolverine storyline without Hugh Jackman. So there are fictional scripted podcasts out there, but they're not commonly done. And that's usually because they take a certain amount of time and effort to produce. When I looked at the landscape and was trying to figure out where do we fit in, I really wanted to make a fictional scripted podcast that was, there's a podcast out there called The Truth, which is one of the few scripted fictional podcasts. And the guy, Jonathan Mitchell, who produces it, does a really, really amazing job. And he describes his podcast as movies for your ears. And I love that description so much. I've been tempted to steal it so often. But that's sort of what I wanted to aim at, was I wanted to make an immersive experience for people when they listen. One of the cool things that's become possible, since 1950, 1960, is the level of audio technology that's available to everyone is otherworldly. And so the hurdles is knowing how to use it rather than getting access to it. So one of the things you can do now is create stereo sound effects that travel from one ear to another I think probably everyone has seen those, 3D immersive sound booths that people create. And so you can use those in storytelling in a way that no one has been able to before. So that's really, really what I wanted to aim at.
Yeah, and I echo what you've seen with sort of your lay of the land in podcasts, because here's my take on the history of radio drama, 30,000 foot view. You reach this point, like just pre-television, like 30s, 40s, 50s, a lot of really great stuff, pretty much every genre you can think of. Horror, comedy, suspense, drama, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Then
Yeah.
it largely goes away with the advent of TV. Actually, that in Britain, they still had some pretty good stuff going along because of the BBC. So like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy got its start as a radio drama. So there's sort of little examples there, but largely goes underground. But now it seems like with the podcast form, there's a lot more possibility, but you're really seeing very few people really step into the spotlight fully yet. Like
No, you're absolutely right. And it's funny that you mentioned the BBC because I mean, in my mind, that almost exists in a separate category because they're so good at it. They're so good at it that everyone else is just like eviscerated in their wake. The level of work that they're able to do is the best in the game. And they're sort of what radio drama became. I think that's right.
Yeah, and when you look at a lot of the podcasts today, I listen to Homecoming, like that you just mentioned. I've listened to The Truth, and they're pretty good. They are good. They're definitely two of the better examples there. There's others that are quite popular that I listen to. Like, they're getting there. They're getting there. You can tell it's sort of still a medium that's finding its feet. And you'll be able to speak to this really well. But there's a lot of special difficulties that come with radio drama. But I think the potential is there. The fact that you got such overwhelming submissions from, little writers like me and also voice actors, that there's definitely a hunger for this sort of thing. So I think it's a medium ripe for the plucking.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that's the most interesting thing to me, as a Christian, as a Catholic, one of the things that's most interesting to me is how easy it is to produce a radio show. It takes time, it takes money. You have to find collaborators, sound designers, actors, et cetera, et cetera. But compared to making a film, oh my gosh, yeah. It's like riding a bike compared to, piloting a jet. It's just a completely different thing. And so one of the things that's really exciting to me is, the Merry Beggars, the mission is to be leaven for the culture, is to actually heal the culture by telling stories that depict the human person in all of their dignity and their desire for God. And I could either spend 10 years trying to write the perfect movie script and, work really hard at fundraising for this, and a decade later have what would probably be a pretty decent film, but would be one film. Or I could actually go down this radio drama avenue and make work with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of artists over the period of those 10 years, and not only have, one film at the end of it, but have an entire community of collaborators. And that's the thing that's really exciting to me is I think a lot of people who want to make work that is countercultural have sort of a silver bullet mentality, where they want to make the one thing that's going to convert everyone or really like heal everything. And it's like, well, that's not how human beings work. Have you read your Aristotle? Come on.
Right.
Well, exactly. It's like, you can't put that. That's the thing too. I mean, it's after you stop as an artist, in my opinion, it's after you stop being precious about your work that you can actually do good work. And you can only stop being precious with your work after you've relaxed. And so, being able to do this type of work where the stakes are low and you can reach thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of listeners, it's just such a beautiful opportunity to work with artists that might not otherwise have a voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a couple other highlights that I think give radio an edge over other mediums. It's possible to just widen the scope of the stories that you can tell as opposed to film. Like one of the reasons why sci-fi in the 40s and 50s was so good in radio drama is
Yeah.
they don't have to worry about their special effects budget.
Oh, true.
I think science fiction is the best genre on radio, hands down.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I've listened to episodes where like they're creepy creature features or they have like aliens and you're trying to think if this was done with like 50 special effects, one, it would have been extremely expensive. And two, it's going to look really crappy. But because it's radio,
Yeah.
it works just as well for me today.
It also makes me think of Ray Bradbury's, point of view, because when he was writing science fiction, the reason that he wrote science fiction was because, or he loved it. But one of the things that he thought science fiction allowed you to do was examine the human condition and human nature more closely, because you put people, in a spaceship to Mars where they're alone for 10 years. And it's such an alien environment that you can use that genre to really examine the human heart in such a cool way.
Yeah, because it's what stays true to being human, regardless of the context. And when you put them in a context that is not earthbound whatsoever, then I can see how it would just highlight this is really essential humanity. Even on the spaceship in Mars, this is how we are.
Two of my favorite old radio shows, X-1 and Dimension X, they're both science fiction shows. They're about an hour long each. And every single episode is just that. It's just what you said. It's a science fiction story. There's robots, aliens, whatever. There's a little bit of sound design, and they're just so captivating to listen to. They're absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and another thing I appreciate about radio theater, I forget. I ironically, I think I listened to a podcast about radio theater where they mentioned this, but it seems it's a very interactive medium too, because your brain has to provide the pictures. So you are actively engaging your imagination in this in a way that you aren't in something like film. And that I think that was really good for me being someone who grew up on radio drama. Just it's good exercise for the imagination muscles.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're all suffering from Zoom fatigue and we are looking for any excuse to get away from our computer screens, having an audio medium where you can be puttering about the house, putting, your dishes away or making food or whatever, and be in this storytelling world is just, it's such a cool opportunity. I think it's really a really good medium for where we are right now culturally.
Awesome. So let's shift now to talking about some of the nuts and bolts of this. Like I said, we've been doing something very tiny over on the Anselm side. It's like in embryonic form. But even from me, like seeing this, there's a lot to it. And Mandy, like you can speak to this. Just the coming at it from you. You have background doing acting in front of people who can see you. How's it different for you doing the voice acting?
For me? Oh, gosh.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure this was intentional, but one thing that struck me is that the young man who was recording had his back to me. And I realized later, I'm assuming that was intentional because he didn't want to be influenced by whatever my eyebrows were doing. He wanted to hear it the way the listener would hear it. And so, that was a very strange experience for me. I didn't really prepare myself. I wouldn't have known how to prepare myself. I just sort of drove over there and talked into the mic. But I mean, when you're on stage, I don't tend to look at the audience members, but you still there's an interaction there. I mean, even if I'm not making eye contact with them, you can see their posture shift. And you can hear their reactions to things. If it's drama, then there's an inhale or an exhale collectively. And if it's comedy, you're hoping they're laughing. Yeah. So that was to have no visual feedback whatsoever to what I was doing. I would like to try it more so I could get better at it. Cause like I said, I think I told you this, Matt, I didn't think I got it. So I didn't think I did very well. I left and I was like, well, hey, I got out of the house for an hour, so it was a win. But I didn't think I did very well at all, but I want to do better.
Yeah. Yeah, so it sounds like it's different in a lot more ways than you might think initially. Now, I'm guessing, Peter,
Yeah.
that's like one of several things that is more different than you'd imagine when it comes to producing one of these.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, just to share, so I'm also an actor as well, and there are different types of voice acting. So there's documentary where you try to sound like this, and everything is all calm, and look at the panda ripping apart, this other animal, right? So there's
The
documentary.
panda.
Oh, what it'd be an interesting documentary, am I right?
It would.
And then there's commercial where Anselm Society welcomes you to, and everything is so full of energy and life, and no one actually feels this much emotion ever. And it's just like so resonant. And then you have dramatic acting, which is very similar to, other forms of acting. But as you said, Mandy, like you have to be aware that it only is communicated through your voice. So if you have a super expressive face, or one of the tricks that people use in recording in a sound booth is they'll use their body because that'll actually immediately translate into their voice. So, whenever you get like really, so this is a tip for you, Mandy.
Yay, thank you.
Anytime that you're acting and you're like, wow, this is flat, why is nothing happening? You can do simple things like wave your arm in the air, or, really like move your sternum and your whole body forward, because whatever you do in your body ends up showing up in your voice. And so it's things like that of like learning how to strike the right note in a recording session, so that you have enough material to work with when you're back in the editing booth. But it's a different medium. It's a really different medium.
The hardest part for me, because they had me trying to do some narration versus dialogue, and the narration was much harder for me than the dialogue.
Yeah.
Because I know it's both voice acting, but even those two things are so different, as you were saying. Like the commercial is different than the documentary, and I felt a lot better about the dialogue. Yeah,
it's interesting. I did a voiceover audition in New York like a year ago, and I went in thinking, oh, I'll be myself. I'll be an actor. I'm a stage actor, but it's voiceover. So I go in, and the guy, God bless him, he took mercy on me. He was like coaching me. It was for like a McGill's steak seasoning or whatever. This podcast is not sponsored by McGill's. And I go in there, and it's literally a series of 1 or 2 word statements. So it's like,
oh no,
family, delicious, Christmas. And the thing is like, it's so weird when you go in there, because you're just like family, Christmas, whatever.
Right.
But the actual skill and technique of it is, you actually have to be able to put, unironically, an entire experience into one of those words. Oh. And it's just like such a different thing than doing dramatic acting. One of the problems that we ran into when I was developing the relationships that we needed to produce this was, I would call up a sound designer and talk to them, and the work that they would do would be, they did some narrative work, but all of the shows were produced as if they were commercials, because that was the background that the sound designers had.
Oh,
and so there wasn't any dialogue that you could like relax and listen to and think that it was like a real world conversation. It was all like, hello, honey, how are you? It was so resonant and just like in your face. That's one of the things that I cared about, was I wanted to, again, the BBC, I think, is such a great example of people who just master this. You listen to a BBC radio show and it just sounds incredible. It sounds like a film. So yeah, no, it's a really unique medium.
Yeah, so let's talk about the decisions you've made so far with looking especially at the quarantine plays. Yeah. So let's talk about the idea behind the plays themselves, and also what was your thinking behind selecting the ones you've done? Because I believe you're doing a series of like 12 sort of standalone mini stories. So what was your thinking behind them?
I called up a priest who's on my on our advisory board, Father Peter John Cameron, who ran a theater in New York City for a long time. And he and I were talking just about everything that was happening. COVID was fresh. And he said to me that if you read the front page of the Wall Street Journal, it seems like people are facing their own suffering and they don't know what to make of it. And so people are going into, I think he described it as like a passion tide, where people are just like experiencing suffering, but they don't have access to understanding it. And so he and I kept on talking about how our culture is going through like a monastic phase, and we're such a secular culture that all we can do is spend our time on Instagram and Twitter. We don't know how to enter into that. And so I wrote up a description that was, everyone has become a monk now, and everyone is experiencing this sort of profound unifying situation, which, I mean, has it ever happened before in history? I don't know. I don't think so, because we haven't had the communications technology to make it an experience of solidarity like it is now. And so I wrote up a quick description, paid a graphic designer to make an image of a guy in quarantine, and we threw it up on the website, and submissions started pouring in really, really quickly. So the whole idea was, we're going through such a unique experience. What are the new experiences that humanity is going through, and where are the plays and the pieces of art and the artistic expression that spring from that? And so we were asking for submissions that weren't necessarily about quarantine, but were responding to quarantine. One of the things that, you realize more and more is that everyone responds to an event or a situation or a piece of art differently and uniquely. And so what I really wanted to do was ask the artists who submitted, what are you discovering in this moment? And so we got everything from zombie stories to touching family comedies to, dystopian British, whatever that was, to everything in between. And it was really amazing. We also got, a whole range. And one of the things when we were picking the pieces that I wanted to make sure of was that I didn't pick the pieces. I didn't want this to be Peter Atkinson's parade of his own personal aesthetic. I wanted it to be something a lot larger. And so I organized a group of about 34 artists that I know, playwrights, actors, directors, and they each read each script twice, or they read about 5 to 10 scripts each, and each script was read twice by a different judge. And then they would assign them a score based on 5 or 6 criteria, and we would average the 2 scores, rank the plays, and then they went on to the next round where all the plays were shuffled again. We did the same reading, judging, ranking, and then we whittled it down to about, I think it was 5 or 7 plays that we then sent on to the final 3-person panel of who were, some of the most experienced theater artists we knew. And then they picked the top 3 plays. We only were going to produce 3, but there were so many plays that I wanted to produce that were in the top 12 that I just said, you know what? Sure, we're going to produce those 3, but we can actually do a year-long series where we produce 1 a month. And it's been awesome. I mean, the plays that we are able to produce are such a variety. I mean, the first one was a dystopian radio program from a future Britain about a government robot who comforts citizens and lulls them into betraying their fellow citizens. The second episode was about 2 young New Yorkers who have an ambivalent relationship to their faith, and quarantine sends them down this path of introspection where they may or may not end up reuniting. And it's just this like beautiful memory play. The next play that we're releasing on Monday is going to be a really, really sweet, charming family comedy, which is I mean, to me, it's just so moving. I reviewed the draft with the sound designer this, I think it was last week, and it just moved me to tears. Like, it was so, so beautiful. So we just have like amazing writing from all over the world and just such a range of different voices. It's really, really, it's so fulfilling for me as an artist to like actually be in a position to help these voices get produced and shared. It's a really beautiful position to be in.
Yeah, and let me say too, because when I found out what my script was there, I was like, all right, cool. So then as time goes on, and you start releasing, it's like, all right, let's see what this is like. So I listened to the first one, which was The Robot in Dystopian Britain, and I loved it. I thought it was so good. I listened to it driving in the car. I came back to it, like, Danielle, this is great. I'm so excited. This is like, because that dystopian robot was so weird, and I friggin' loved it. And I'm just I don't remember who the writer and who the producer, like, so good. Kudos to you, whoever you were who wrote that, and yeah, more of it. And but along those lines, I really like how different these genres are. I mean, and again, just another strength of radio. It's easy to do a lot of these different genres where you have the dystopian robot and the heartwarming family comedy, and they can all exist cozily together.
I'm going to have to binge all these. Sorry.
You should, Mandy.
No.
I'm going to. Yep.
It's been really exciting to have those different voices. And then the other thing that's great is so many actors now are setting themselves up with professional voice acting rigs. So the availability of voice acting talent from professional actors is just, it's skyrocketing, and it makes the job of casting it so much fun because you get to pick from such a range of voices. It's a huge privilege. And Matthew writes script for do you remember with Relaxabot? That's thing was so good.
Relaxabot? Oh my God, I love that.
Doesn't that just sound like what a bureaucracy would name a robot?
Yes.
I love it. And it was such a good script. Like, usually, so my process in working with any of these scripts, I've directed the first 3 episodes, and then we're going to be bringing on directors to help with the process for future episodes. But my process has been to read through the script and then find images, which is like not something you would think to do with a radio script.
Yeah.
But what you want to do is what my approach is, with Relaxabot, I wanted to design the opening sequence. So I don't know if you remember, Matthew, but at the very opening, there's the explosion, and then you hear the ear is ringing, and you hear the person, the viewer, get out of the rubble and run back through, crowds in the streets and destruction, all the way back to his secure vault of an apartment. And what's funny about that is none of that is in the script. So all of that was me as a director looking at the script and then trying to figure out what's a way that we could usher the audience into the entire world of the script. And that's just such a fun thing to do in radio.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I do remember that opening, because I remember thinking, first of all, like, ooh, this is weird in a good way. I like this. And also I remember thinking, oh, they're putting a lot of attention to like the sound landscape here. And again, really taking advantage of the medium. And I really appreciate that. And we are unfortunately, a little past time now. But Peter, thank you so much. And once again, let's give a formal plug for all your stuff. Where can we find more of the Merry Beggars?
TheMerryBeggars.com is our home base for everything. You can also search up The Merry Beggars on anywhere that you listen to podcasts. We have 2 podcast series out right now. One is the Quarantine Plays, which are these scripts that we've been talking about. And then we just launched The Dailies, which is a podcast series that we launched for Advent. We're doing a reading of A Christmas Carol all through Advent. And then we'll continue on afterwards. So it's a daily podcast that we launched this past week. Yeah. And I also wanted to say too, anyone who wants to listen to old radio or discover that world, if you don't know, this is the best place to find it. Go to archive.org and you can search in the search bar for old time radio. And there is a society that is dedicated to preserving the hundreds of thousands of old radio episodes. So
wow.
you can listen to, we'll all die before any of us finish listening to those episodes. You can search up. The first show I would recommend people to listen to is called Johnny Dollar, which is just one of the absolute classics. Bob Bailey is the best actor in it. And it's such a fun hobby that just like restores your imagination to a different culture than we're in right now, and one that was just full of stories and imagination and worlds that we still have access to through old radio shows.
Awesome. I second all of that. There's actually a lot of good podcast feeds that do that as well. They give you old-timey radio programs. I subscribe to several of them. They're great. It's so easy to listen to now. They're so widely available, and yeah, they're just great listening. So definitely check those out. Please check out the Merry Beggars quarantine plays, dailies they're doing. Really, it's really good stuff. I'm super psyched about it. And yeah, once again, well, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Fire is down to embers. Customers are trundling home, and you polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society. Thank you to our guest, Peter, and my co-host, Mandy, and thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.